title is Collaborative COVID-19 Web Archive. It's definitely a huge collaboration. The International Internet Preservation Consortium is a group of 50 or so libraries from around the world, some other organizations like archives and museums, but mostly libraries. And its focus is web archiving, which is kind of a specialist concern. So because there aren't that many people doing web archiving in individual countries, in order to advance best practices and to share information about what we're doing, we've had to create this sort of international group. That was founded in 2003. And Columbia University Libraries, where I work, joined this group in about 2012. So let's move on. So this is Butler Library, Columbia University Libraries, where I work. This picture was taken in the past. Obviously now you'd see people with masks on because of COVID. I myself haven't been in this building since March, but I still work there. I've been worked there since 2004. And Columbia's mission statement emphasizes global aspect a lot. It's to support research and teaching on global issues. It cites that, the importance of reaching out to many countries and regions. And its basic, core mission is to advance knowledge. The libraries itself, the division of the university, says specifically in their mission statement that they want to build, shape, sustain, and make discoverable collections that transcend traditional boundaries of format and domain, offering enduring research value. So the reason that's relevant for this topic is that we all know that libraries are good at collecting books and manuscripts and things like that, but Columbia decided in about 2008 that a lot of information nowadays is being published directly to the internet. And so if the libraries don't collect it there, they won't be able to get it. I mean, things that might have been in print in the past are now sometimes put only on the web. And so we started the program to actually start archiving websites that we consider to have research value for the future. And so the thematic web collections that I built at Columbia specifically are about mostly on human rights, New York City kind of historic preservation, which is called New York City Places and Spaces. We have a collection called New York City Religions, which is a collection of the websites of about 700 or 800 churches, temples, mosques, etc., that are based in New York City. So we capture all those websites to create a kind of slice of life of religious activity in New York City. And we have a collection of Frank Lloyd Wright websites that are like the websites of individual Frank Lloyd Wright properties that are now maintained as museums or as rental properties or whatever. So that's the kind of thing we collect. And I also do I make copies of the columbia.edu web domain twice a year so that we are preserving everything that Columbia publishes to the web directly. All this stuff can be accessed from this page, and I should point out at this point that I'll share these slides with Wayne after the session, and you can all look at them if you want. All of these screenshots that you see are all linked so that you can just click on them and go directly to these pages if you wanted to. But mentioning this, so on the left-hand side here under collections, those are the ones I built myself. Down below, you can't see below the screenshot, there's something called IV Plus, Libraries Confederation Collaborative Collections. And on the lower right, you see IPC Collaborative Collections, including the novel coronavirus collection that we're going to talk about today. But you can access all those from that page. So some of you may not really know anything about web archiving. It's not that well known, but those people who do know about web archiving are most likely to have heard about the Wayback Machine, which is this page here. It's just you can find it just at archive.org. And the Internet Archive is a nonprofit group based in San Francisco, and they've been archiving websites basically since the early 90s. This task has grown, the web has exploded to billions of pages, so there's really no way that one organization could archive all that. And so national libraries around the world take on that task as well. But also the Internet Archive offers a pay-for-service subscription service called archiveit.org, in which individual institutions like Columbia, for example, or a public library or other university library can subscribe to the service, and then their curators can choose what exactly they want to archive, and they can put it in collections that are dedicated to one topic or whatever. So this is the archiveit.org homepage. At this portal, you could search all the web archives that are being created by the 500 or so partner institutions that use this service. I took the screenshot in part because one of our collections happened to be, in the carousel featured on the front page. But you can see there's also collections from the Alaska State Library and University of Iowa libraries, et cetera. So that's where all that stuff lives. If you were to click on this link and go into one of these collections, you would see something like this. That tells you who collected it at the top. And then on the left-hand side, you can see the names of the collections that Columbia has built. And then in the center is just a list of all the individual websites that have been archived with some metadata describing them. So before I jump into the COVID stuff, I just wanted to make one last sort of Dartmouth connection and a plug for something else that Columbia is involved with. There's a group called the Ivy Plus Libraries Confederation, which is all of the Ivy League schools, libraries, which is about 8, I think, plus some external ones that are cooperating with this endeavor, including Stanford, University of Chicago, Duke, MIT, Johns Hopkins, I think are those that non-Ivy Plus one, non-Ivy League ones. So all of these libraries have long had a cooperation agreement where they share, it's called Borrow Direct, where they share circulation of their books with one another in a sort of expedited fashion. So if I'm at Columbia and the book that I want to check out from the library is not available, I can get maybe Penn's copy or Dartmouth's copy 2 days later will come to me through Columbia's library and vice versa. So that's kind of a nice thing that the Ivy Plus libraries share. But a few years ago, they moved into also doing collection development together. In other words, collecting things together. And so they jointly fund a librarian position at Columbia, which my colleague, whose name is Samantha Abrams. And so what she does is she builds web archives that are suggested by any of the 13 library members. And then subject specialists from different libraries within Ivy Plus collaborate on a given topic, such as state elections or the contemporary composers or webcomics or Latin American art, things like that. They identify websites about those things, and my colleague builds those collections. And so Dartmouth has librarians contributing to this effort, and so that's something I would mention and put a link in here in case you want to check it out. So this is the International Internet Preservation Consortium's website. As it says, it's a network of people interested in web archiving. You can sort of see where they're located in this. I'm sorry, let's go back to this map. They're mostly in Europe, but there are also some in North America, some in Canada, and mostly in the US. There's a few East Asian, so we have the National Libraries of Korea, Japan, and China involved, as well as Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Chile, and I think over here is the Bibliotheca Alexandrina in Alexandria, Egypt. So in about 5 years ago, I think the earliest collection shown here is 2015, so maybe 6 years ago, the IPC decided that we would work together so all of us are separately building web archive collections, but most of them are limited by national boundaries, right? So the National Library of France has its mandate to capture all French websites or all websites within the domain .fr, and so it's kind of blinkered in those. Each country has to kind of work with its own stuff, and we thought it would be nice to have a mechanism for going beyond those national boundaries, building collections that are themselves transnational. And so one of the first examples that came up was the Olympics, right? Whose responsibility is it to archive an Olympiad that involves hundreds of countries and athletes from around the world? So we've been building collections about the Olympics since I think 2010, possibly. I'm not sure. 2010 or 2012, I think was the earliest one. So going into this year, 2020, we expected, in fact, that our major collection in 2020 would be the Tokyo Summer Olympics that were scheduled for July of 2020. Of course, those were canceled because of COVID. They may or may not happen this summer, again in Tokyo, and if they do, we'll archive them. But early this year, early last year, February of 2020, we were noticing, that novel coronavirus was starting to spread around the world, and we decided that that would be a good topic for a collaborative collection as well. So as early as mid-February, I think we put out a call to curators from all the 50 institutions asking them to nominate seeds for this collection. This is the access page for the collection that we've built, and I'll show you a lot more details about that later. And then just going through these slides, these are some of the examples of things that we've archived that I'm going to show you, and they're all linked from this slide. So if you want to take a closer look in your own time later, you can. But in order to actually show them to you, I'm not going to go through the slides. I'm going to shift over to my browser where I've preloaded some of these things. So let me just briefly get out of this and minimize that, and then we'll go to Firefox. All right. So how do we work? We're spread all over the world, and it's simple. We use a Google spreadsheet, basically. And so we can see in February 10th of 2020, we started this collection, and we started with obvious choices like the WHO, the CDC. We just started putting in URLs, and we also wanted other kinds of information about each seed to help people find them. So in addition to the URL, we get the top level domain, the title of the article or website. We get the languages it's in, the country it's published in, some keywords. Then on the right-hand side here, you can sort of see who's doing this. So it started with Columbia, but also National Library of Finland. It has some early examples. And then if we scroll down, it just, this goes going on and on. We have over 11,500 URLs that we've archived now. And so it's...
Alex, I think we're stuck on your screen. We're not seeing what you're talking about.
That's interesting. Oh, it says it's paused. Let me click on new share. How about now? Can you see my screen again?
No, it's still stuck on your PowerPoint.
All right, so I just stopped the share, and I'll share it again. It can be because of the size of these. How about now?
Yes.
Okay. So I won't say it again, but this is the spreadsheet where we're gathering all this information. It's how we work, and the result of all this work is here's the collection itself. Within archiveit.org, there's a particular collection, which is this novel coronavirus collection. If you go to this, what you'll see is basically a giant list of websites. You see it says 11,615 total results. That means that there's 11,000 separate websites that we've archived, and they're displayed on pages of 100 each. So it's basically 100 times 100 or 100 times 110. That's pretty daunting for users. Like, how are they going to make sense of all this? So that's why we have metadata on the sides here to help you narrow it. So if you wanted to see just the things in English or Spanish, or if you just wanted to get a sense of how the collection is divided into different kinds of content, you can sort of use these facets on the left to narrow it down. So you see all these different kinds of languages, and there's actually something like 50 languages total in this collection. These are the kinds of websites, and I'm going to show you examples of all these in a second. The top level domains for each, so the ones you're familiar with, like .com and .org, but also a lot of the national level domains. So .br is Brazil, .pe is Peru, for example, and goes on like that. And then the country of publication itself, where they come from. So the biggest group is from the US, but that's still only 1,900 sites. It's less than a quarter of the overall 11,000 sites. So I've selected some, sort of highlights from the collection just to give you a sense of what we're collecting and why. At the highest level is sort of intergovernmental. So obviously the World Health Organization. So now you're seeing for the first time an example of an archived website. So how do you know it's an archived website? Well, the answer is partly they all have this yellow banner at the top saying, you're no longer looking at the live CDC or the live WHO website. Instead, you're looking at a copy of it that was made on February 25th of 2020. So that's pretty early in the pandemic. WHO is already, we're thinking about coronavirus, but this is not the scariest possible graphic. It just looks like she has a cold. And so, partly what we're doing is we're taking snapshots of how these important resources look at particular times, and then tracing their evolution over the months of the pandemic. So this is how it looked back in February of 2020. This is another intergovernmental organization. This is the European CDC, European Center for Disease Control. And this is a nice resource that has, all this detailed information week by week of the COVID situation. This is for much later. This is from October of 2020. But they have all these charts and stuff for each European region, and it goes on like that. So that's a lot of valuable stuff to have. Then national government stuff. So here's the CDC in the US, of course. Again, this is an early copy. You can see it's from February 21st of 2020. And there, the first priority is like explaining, what is coronavirus, how does it spread, et cetera. We go now to a copy from just 3 weeks ago. You see the emphasis has shifted to vaccines, right? Now we have vaccines, and so that's the CDC's main focus. But we have national, equivalents of that from all over the world. This is from Iran. And this is from Vietnam. Collection. Here's an interesting dashboard of all the cases in Singapore. So this is also from relatively recent ago. This is from 3 weeks ago. But notice that Singapore in their entire outbreak have only had 60,000 cases. They had a lot in April, but they've totally beaten it. Now they have a little bit of upsurge again, but they seem to have done a good job of controlling it. This particular thing is interesting because of the other information they provide. So Singapore, has a lot of imported labor. Turns out that most of the people who have gotten COVID in Singapore are actually not from Singapore. They're these imported laborers who live in tougher conditions, like from Bangladesh or India. And if you go down to this, I don't know if you're seeing it or it's being blocked by the Zoom screen here, but this is a breakdown of individual clusters. I don't know if I can close this. I don't know how to close this. Just minimize. Yeah. So these are individual clusters within Singapore, and they did really great contact tracing. The biggest one was a dormitory of overseas workers. There were 797 cases from one place, but I found that to be valuable. But then also, we get more granular. We get to state and local health departments and things like that. So so there was someone using. We also allow public nominations for this collection. It's not just the librarians, but the public can also nominate things. So when we opened that up, there was an anonymous contributor who actually went through and submitted the URLs of all of the county level and state level health departments in the US, which is an amazing thing. There's over 1,000 URLs that they contributed. And so one of them was the New Hampshire one. So we captured that. This is how it looked in March of 2020. And then getting even closer to home, this is Hanover, New Hampshire from December of 2020. It's the COVID update page. I like this page. If I reload this page, let's see if it takes a second. It takes a second longer to load archived pages than live pages, so that this may be a mistake, but yeah, there's loading, and when it loads, before it loads the central information about COVID. Let's see. No, it's probably not worth it, but just going to show you that the picture. There's a picture behind there that has a dog you might recognize from Hanover. Anyway, continuing the theme of local government, this is the city of Frankfurt in Germany, put out a call to citizens to tell their stories, their sort of pandemic stories, Corona-Geschichten. And so here's a case where this woman who works, Sabrina Lin, who works in the Frankfurt Zoo, is telling her story of what it's like to do her job during the pandemic. All right, so that's half of it. We're halfway through. Let's minimize that one, and I'll get to the other loads of examples. So we do have a lot of media articles from newspapers, sites all over the world in the collection. This is one that I nominated. It's a kind of interactive obituary from the New York Times of the pandemic, and it's kind of nicely designed. These are all people who qualified for New York Times obituary, so they're probably not just average people, but you should be able to click through and
We're still back
see.
in Frankfurt.
What's that? You're still in Frankfurt?
Yeah. We're still in Frankfurt.
Okay, it's because I have so many tabs open. I think let me reshare it again. How about now?
We can see it now.
Okay.
Ian Finkel, the world's greatest xylophonist.
Exactly. So, see, maybe it's Ian's fault that we froze there. Maybe we probably don't want to go into his individual obituary, but this page is a list of all these noted people from around the world who died. Continuing this theme, we have also, I'll just close that so it's not continuing to try to load itself. Maybe that'll freeze us. This is the Wikipedia equivalent of that list of people. It's kind of interesting to see because this copy was taken in April of 2020. They're organized by date of death. So you notice it starts with Chinese citizens because that's where the outbreak started. It moves to Iran, Italy, and then eventually by the time this was taken in April, there are a fair number of Americans being listed in this page. So we've continued to crawl this over time. So this is just a snapshot from April. This is a similar page. I don't know if all of you are familiar with Validpedia, but Validpedia is kind of like a Wikipedia site for politics information. And so this page lists all the politicians and government officials around the country that have been either diagnosed with cases of COVID or actually died of serious illness, including, I think, your New Hampshire Representative Dick Hinch is listed here, of course, along with everyone else at federal and state and local levels. So that's interesting information to save for the future. Now I'll get in the habit of closing these as I go so that we have more bandwidth. This is a Brazilian obituary page, which I found kind of touching. It's called Enumeráveis, which basically means numerable, meaning that you can, even though it seems like it's overwhelming, all the people that have died, you can actually name them individually and think about them as individuals. So this Brazilian site, notice because Brazilian names often are complicated because surnames are complicated because it involves maternal and paternal last names. They're organized alphabetically by first name instead of by last name. But all of these like little blurbs about the individual, and if you drill down into them, you can actually see an obituary that's written by someone close to them. So it's a really nice site, and although it's in Portuguese, if you open it in Google Chrome or something like that, you'll be offered, Chrome will offer you whether you want to translate it into English, and it will simultaneously translate it. You could look at this in English if you wanted to. Closer to home and getting away from celebrities to more ordinary people. This is the United Federation of Teachers page for people who died of coronavirus. that's the last of these obituary pages I'm going to show you. It's kind of dour, but it's definitely something that we're trying to preserve for the future. So into the theme of kind of nonprofit groups who are organizing information about the pandemic, this is called Dear Pandemic, and it's created by an interdisciplinary team of women researchers and clinicians. And they answered questions from the public about things like, you know, these topics listed here. I won't click on them because we don't want to freeze us, but another reason that this is a nice group to focus on today is that if you click on those nerdy girls link, you find out the girls behind, the women behind this effort, and includes people both from Dartmouth, your region, and Columbia in my region. We're up here in New York, so that's a nice thing. These. All right, so we also have a lot of actual scientific and medical papers in the collection, and this is an interesting one. This is someone has nominated this list of retracted papers, right? So that's part of the way science works, is papers are published and then it turns out that there was a problem with them, with the data, whatever, and they have to be retracted, and that's important to correct the record. So here's a list of that kind of stuff about COVID specifically. Here's an actual journal article from the International Journal of Health Geographics, which is actually on the topic of data mapping sites, like all the data mapping sites that people have created to try to keep track of cases of COVID. And the most famous of them is that you've probably seen is this one's from Johns Hopkins. It's actually built using software that makes it hard to archive. So even though we tried a lot to archive the Johns Hopkins site itself in the collection, it just doesn't replay very well because of the GIS software that's used building the site. But it's recorded in here at least. This is an example of a specific dashboard that we did successfully archive. It's focused on COVID cases in Africa. You can see that on the whole, they're doing better than other regions, but within Africa, South Africa is getting hit the hardest, and North African countries. And this is a group called the Lowi Institute. I think it's based in Australia, which defines certain criteria in geography, political systems, population size, economic development, and then use those as criteria for measuring how well each country has managed its COVID outcome. And then it creates these charts based on, you know, these metrics. So they're trying to see, does it, so, you know, I guess in this case, higher is more cases. So, you know, Asia, I'm not sure, I guess a higher score is better. So Asia is doing, they're saying the Asian countries have done better. And then Europe's at the lowest in that metric, but the other metrics here are all listed here. And then at the bottom, they have country rankings. Countries that have done the best, the highest score in managing it, like New Zealand, Vietnam, Taiwan, and unfortunately, U.S. is close to the bottom. Hopefully things will get better soon, but we're down here according to these metrics. So we reserve that, and we're back to the collection page itself. I have one example here, which is my final thing that I'll talk about before passing it over for questions. But the collection has a search box, so you know, one way to access it would be browsing it through these facets. But if you also wanted to, you could just search and see what comes up. So I put in the name of the president of Brazil, Bolsonaro, and just ran a search to see what would happen. And because we have so many news articles in the collection, you sort of get it from looking at these hits. You sort of get an overview of what happened there. You know, so this one says, you know, going against the health authorities, Bolsonaro decides to hold a barbecue for 30 people invited, and that was kind of a mini scandal. then the question is, did he test positive? So they actually had a judge put an order that he was going to have to present his COVID results to the public. And then, of course, sure enough, eventually he has symptoms, and eventually he's confirmed to have COVID. So hopefully this collection will be a resource for this kind of thing as well. Like you can do for researchers to do specific searches. So let's close that. Close that. And I guess I'll stop sharing, and leave it now for questions that anyone might have.
David Allen, go ahead.
Yeah, two questions. I'm wondering, first, how automated the process of downloading a website is. And secondly, I'm wondering, Wayne referenced 1984, and of course, the protagonist of 1984's job was to go back into archives and change things so that it comported with the current thinking. How protected is the archive from political interests or other interests that might want to go back and say, we really don't want to talk about that?
So the first question about the automation of the process, we just use crawlers, which are similar to what Google uses to index the web. Basically, we plug in the starting point, so the homepage of a particular site, and we tell it how deep we want it to go. And then we just send it there, and it can be just a few minutes if it's a small site, or it could take, if I'm giving it a batch of 100 new sites, I might say, take 5 days, to capture all this stuff. And then I have to manually go back after that time to make the results public. I usually do a little quality control first to make sure, because not everything is captured successfully. Like I mentioned with the Johns Hopkins data tracker thing. So there are some problems there. Regarding security, Internet Archive is where all this data resides, is in the Internet Archive in California. They've been doing this for a long time, so they have pretty strong data preservation methods, including backing it up in multiple countries. So they have a mirror of their entire collection in Egypt because of the Bibliotheca Alexandrina there. And the founder of the Internet Archive, Mr. Kale, is very inspired by the idea of, like, his mantra is universal access to knowledge. And so the biggest historical example of that was the original Library of Alexandria. So he's made efforts to collaborate with them. When Donald Trump was elected in 2016, the Internet Archive specifically took steps to back up all of their data, again, also in a location in Canada. I don't know how. I presume that their servers are pretty protected from hackers trying to go in and change things, but it's not foolproof. It is possible for people to point to something that they're claiming is an archive copy and have it be sort of locally manipulated in some way. So you have to be careful of that kind of stuff. But the Internet Archive is committed to. It has been used in court, for example. Like, companies have been sued over what they said on a certain day, and it's been shown that judges will accept Internet Archive copy of site as an accurate record of what a given website looked like on a particular day.
Jed, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. If I went to the archive of Frank Lloyd Wright, would I just find his works, or would I find the underside of his life as well?
You would find 70 or so websites of individual properties that he built, and depending on what the person who put that website together, some of them do put some biographical information about him. They usually have how did Wright collaborate with the particular couple who commissioned this particular house, for example. And they say he had 4 or 5 major styles over the course of his career. So they usually say, this is a particular example of this kind of style, prairie style, or this is an example of Usonian, architecture or whatever. So it's mostly websites about individual Frank Lloyd Wright properties, like Falling Water in Pennsylvania, or something like that. It's not so much biographical information.
Well, Alex, thank you very much. That was very, very interesting.
All right, you're welcome.